If someone had told me a year ago that my life would unravel the way it has, I wouldn't have believed them. My name is Leonardo, and for the past 13 years, I was married to Harper, a woman I thought was my partner, my confidant, and my greatest support. Together, we built a seemingly perfect life, a stable home, fulfilling careers, and a family dynamic that felt strong and unbreakable. I'm a financial advisor, methodical by nature and accustomed to analyzing risks. My work is about precision and trust, two qualities I thought extended into every aspect of my life. Harper, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. She's vibrant, compassionate, and dedicated to her work as a nonprofit director. Her energy drew me in when we first met, and it's what kept our marriage lively, even through tough times. We were the couple everyone admired. At least, that's what people said during our family gatherings, where Harper was always the center of attention. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, of laughing at just the right moment to lighten the mood, of bridging gaps between relatives who barely spoke otherwise. For years, I thought we were solid. Sure, like any couple, we had our disagreements, her spontaneous nature clashed with my need for structure, but we always found common ground. Or so I believed. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there. Small cracks in the foundation that I chose to ignore, thinking they were insignificant. Harper's increased time at work, the occasional tension when we hosted family dinners, the way she seemed to light up around certain people in a way she didn't with me anymore. One of those people was my younger brother, Adrian. Adrian had always been the charmer in the family. For years younger than me, he had a way of breezing through life with an effortless charm that I sometimes envied. While I worked hard to build a career and a stable home, Adrian lived freely, hopping between jobs and relationships, always chasing the next thrill. Despite our differences, I'd always looked out for him. He was my brother, after all, and family meant everything to me. Adrian was a fixture at our family gatherings, often helping Harper in the kitchen or sharing stories that made everyone laugh. I never thought twice about their interactions, why would I? Harper was my wife, and Adrian was my brother. There was no reason to suspect anything untoward. But over time, small things started to add up. Harper's mood would shift after spending time with Adrian. She seemed more animated, her laughter more genuine. At first, I dismissed it as nothing more than a close sibling-in-law bond. Now, I wish I had paid closer attention. Our family was close-knit, with frequent get-togethers for birthdays, holidays, and casual dinners. Harper was always enthusiastic about hosting, saying it was a way to keep everyone connected. I took pride in our role as the glue that held the family together. I didn't realize that beneath the surface, something much darker was brewing. The day I discovered the truth was like any other, yet it marked the beginning of the end. At the time, I couldn't have imagined the depth of the betrayal that was about to unravel, not just by Harper but by someone I had trusted my entire life. The story I'm about to share isn't just about infidelity. It's about the destruction of trust, the shattering of family bonds, and the painful journey of trying to put the pieces back together when the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The first signs that something was amiss were subtle, small ripples in what I had thought was a calm and steady sea. Harper had always been busy with her job, often working late or attending fundraisers for the nonprofit she managed. But in the past few months, her absences seemed to stretch longer, her excuses thinner. Late meeting, she'd say with a distracted smile, barely looking up from her phone. At first, I didn't think much of it. Her job was demanding, and I'd always admired her dedication. But then there were the phone calls, always taken in another room, her voice hushed and her responses curt. When I asked who it was, she'd wave it off with a casual, work stuff. You wouldn't want the boring details. Then there was Adrian. Family gatherings had always been a source of joy for me, a chance to reconnect with the people who mattered most. But lately, I'd noticed a shift in the dynamic between Harper and my brother. It wasn't obvious, not at first. A lingering glance here, a shared laugh there, small things that I convinced myself were innocent. But then, the moments became harder to ignore. At a recent barbecue, Harper and Adrian were inseparable. While I was manning the grill and catching up with my parents, they were in the corner, heads bent together over something on her phone. When I approached, their laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a forced casualness that set my teeth on edge. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a dumb meme Adrian showed me," Harper said, her smile a little too wide. Adrian nodded, his face unreadable. "Nothing you'd find interesting, Leo. You're too serious for this kind of humor." The comment stung, though I didn't show it. Instead, I focused on flipping the burgers, pretending I hadn't noticed the tension in their body language or the way Harper's hand brushed against Adrian's as she passed him a drink. The unease began to grow, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I started paying closer attention, looking for patterns I might have missed before. Harper's phone, once left casually on the counter or the coffee table, was now always with her, the screen face down. She was dressing differently for her late meetings, sharper outfits, a little more makeup, a spritz of perfume she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't just the phone or the clothes. It was her demeanor. She seemed distracted, distant, like her mind was elsewhere even when we were in the same room. Conversations felt shallow, her responses vague. "Everything okay?" I asked one evening as we sat down for dinner. She looked up from her plate, startled. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual. "You've just seemed preoccupied lately." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Work's been crazy. You know how it is." I nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The final straw came at another family gathering, this time at my parents' house. I walked into the living room to find Harper and Adrian sitting unusually close on the couch, their heads tilted toward each other as they whispered. "Hey," I said, louder than I intended. They both jumped, their faces flushing as they turned to me. "Just talking about the game," Adrian said quickly, gesturing to the muted football game on the TV. Harper nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, nothing important." But it felt important. It felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to be part of. That night, as we drove home, Harper was unusually quiet. When I asked her if everything was okay, she just nodded, staring out the window. But I knew better. Something was wrong. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I could trust her. After that night at my parents' house, the unease that had been simmering in my mind boiled over. I started paying even closer attention, scrutinizing every interaction, every excuse, and every moment that didn't quite add up. It wasn't just Harper's behavior, it was Adrian's too. He had always been friendly and easygoing, but lately, he seemed overly attentive to Harper. At family dinners, he was the first to laugh at her jokes, the first to refill her glass, the first to linger when the rest of us were clearing the table. I began to notice their subtle, almost imperceptible cues. The way their eyes met across the room, the way she leaned in just a little too closely when he spoke, the way their conversation seemed more animated than any she had with me. One evening, while Harper was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, and my stomach tightened when I saw the name, Adrian. I hesitated. I wasn't the kind of man who went through his wife's phone. Trust had always been a cornerstone of our marriage, or at least, it used to be. But the doubts gnawed at me, and before I could stop myself, I unlocked her phone. The messages were mundane at first, inside jokes, updates about family gatherings, but as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Adrian, can't stop thinking about last weekend. When can we talk again?" "Harper, soon. We have to be careful. Leo's been asking questions." The air seemed to leave the room. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the words. The implications were clear, but my mind struggled to process them. This wasn't just an innocent friendship. This was something deeper, something darker. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it and sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. My worst fears were coming true. The woman I had loved and trusted for 13 years wasn't just lying to me, she was betraying me with my own brother. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. Harper's phone wouldn't give me all the answers I needed, so I started paying closer attention to her schedule. She had a work meeting the following evening, and I made a mental note of the time she left. Once she was gone, I called Adrian. "Hey, where are you?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Just at home," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "Nothing planned tonight?" "Nope, just a quiet night in." "Why?" "Just checking," I said, my voice tight. I hung up, my suspicions growing. Something wasn't adding up. Later that night, Harper came home with the same polished excuse, long meeting. Lots to catch up on. She kissed my cheek and went upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That weekend, at another family gathering, I watched them more closely than ever. They were careful, but not careful enough. I caught the quick glances, the fleeting touches, the way Harper's laughter seemed louder and more genuine when Adrian was around. And then, as the evening wound down, I overheard a snippet of their conversation. "Later?" Adrian whispered, his voice low. Harper glanced around, then nodded subtly. I clenched my fists, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. And it was about to destroy everything. After overhearing their exchange at the family gathering, I knew I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. My gut told me something was happening, and the only way to confirm it was to confront it head-on. The following Monday, Harper claimed she had another late meeting after work. This time, I decided to follow her. I waited until she left the house, dressed impeccably as always, and then gave her a few minutes before getting into my car. My heart pounded as I tailed her through the streets. I kept a safe distance, my mind racing with possibilities. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that my suspicions were baseless and I'd feel foolish for doubting her. But the deeper, darker part of me knew the truth. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the other side of town. I parked across the street, my breath catching as I saw Adrian's car already there. They met inside, sitting at a corner table by the window. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. Harper leaned in close, her hand resting on Adrian's forearm. He smiled at her in a way that made my stomach churn. I stayed in my car, watching as they laughed and shared what looked like an intimate moment. The cafe's soft lighting and the quiet atmosphere only amplified the betrayal I felt. When they finally left, they walked to Adrian's car together. Harper glanced around nervously before leaning in to kiss him. It wasn't a quick, friendly peck, it was the kind of kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The image of them together burned into my mind, searing every ounce of trust I'd once had for both of them. I waited until they drove off separately before heading home. My mind was a blur, alternating between anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. By the time Harper returned, I was sitting at the dining table, the evidence laid out in front of me, printouts of their text messages I'd taken from her phone, a photo of their kiss snapped on my own, and a list of the times and places they'd been together based on what I'd pieced together over the past few weeks. She walked in, her heels clicking against the floor as she set her purse down. When she saw me sitting there, her face paled. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You tell me," I said, pushing the evidence toward her. Her eyes widened as she took in the messages and the photo. For a moment, she said nothing, her lips trembling as tears filled her eyes. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice cold and sharp. "I followed you, Harper. I saw everything. You've been cheating on me, with Adrian, my own brother. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain. I never meant for this to happen, she sobbed. It was a mistake, Leo. I swear, it just happened. It just happened. That's your excuse? I asked, my anger boiling over. You betrayed me. Both of you did. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To our family? She fell silent, her shoulders shaking as she cried into her hands. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to release the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. But instead, I stood up, my voice trembling with rage. I trusted you, Harper. I trusted him. And you both destroyed that trust. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. As I closed the door to the guest room where I planned to sleep that night, I realized that this betrayal had shattered more than just our marriage. It had shattered my entire sense of family, of loyalty, of what I thought I knew about the people closest to me. And there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. Harper was still in the house, avoiding me entirely, but I knew I couldn't stop at confronting her. Adrian was just as guilty, and I needed answers from him, too. I texted him, keeping my message short and direct. We need to talk. Meet me at the park at noon. He replied within minutes. Everything okay? It took everything in me not to tell him exactly what was wrong over the phone. Instead, I typed back. Just meet me. When I arrived at the park, Adrian was already there, sitting on a bench near the duck pond. He looked casual, as though he didn't have a care in the world, sipping a coffee and scrolling through his phone. The sight of him made my blood boil. How could he sit there so calmly, knowing what he had done? Adrian, I said, my voice tight as I approached. He looked up, smiling at first, but his expression faltered when he saw the look on my face. Leo. What's going on? You tell me, I said, crossing my arms. What's been going on between you and Harper? His eyes widened, and he quickly looked away, setting his coffee down on the bench. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, I snapped. I know, Adrian. I saw you two last night. I have the messages, the photos, everything. So don't insult me by pretending this isn't happening. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it again, but then his shoulders slumped. He let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. Leo, I'm sorry, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean. Don't, I interrupted, my voice trembling with anger. Don't tell me you didn't mean for it to happen. You don't accidentally kiss someone. You don't accidentally sneak around behind your brother's back. I never wanted to hurt you, he said, his voice desperate. I swear, Leo. I don't know what came over me. What came over you? I repeated, my voice rising. How about selfishness? Disrespect? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my marriage. You've destroyed our family. He flinched at my words, looking genuinely pained, but it wasn't enough. Nothing he could say would be enough. It wasn't serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't about love or anything. It was just, a mistake. A mistake, I said bitterly, shaking my head. You call months of lying and sneaking around a mistake? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? He didn't answer. For the first time, Adrian looked truly ashamed, his head hanging low as he stared at the ground. Stay away from me, I said, my voice firm. And stay away from Harper. Whatever this was, it's over. Do you understand me? Leo, please. Do you understand me? I repeated, cutting him off. He nodded reluctantly, his expression heavy with guilt. I'm sorry, he said again, but the words felt hollow. I turned and walked away, my hands clenched into fists. Confronting Adrian hadn't given me the closure I'd hoped for, it had only deepened the sense of betrayal. By the time I got back to the house, Harper was waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Did you talk to him?" she asked hesitantly. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked past her, heading to the guest room where I planned to stay until I figured out my next move. The weight of their betrayal was suffocating, and I knew that whatever happened next, things would never be the same. The days following my confrontations with Harper and Adrian were some of the darkest of my life. I had always thought of our family as close-knit, a unit that could weather any storm. Now, that image was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of betrayal. Harper tried to apologize, often tearfully, but her words felt meaningless. "It didn't mean anything," she would say, as if that somehow made it better. Adrian's silence was deafening. Apart from a half-hearted text asking if we could talk again, he had disappeared entirely, avoiding both me and the rest of the family. The next family gathering loomed on the calendar, a birthday party for my nephew. I debated whether to go at all, knowing I'd have to face Adrian. But in the end, I decided to attend. I wasn't going to let their actions push me away from the rest of my family. When I arrived, the tension was palpable. Adrian was there, lingering at the edges of the room, avoiding eye contact with me. Harper, to my surprise, hadn't come, whether out of shame or fear, I didn't know. My parents noticed something was off almost immediately. My mother pulled me aside, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on, Leo?" she asked softly. "You and Adrian haven't spoken all night." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But the weight of the secret was too much to carry alone. "Something happened," I said carefully. "Between Adrian and Harper." Her eyes widened, and she glanced across the room at Adrian, who was pretending to be engrossed in a conversation with one of our cousins. "What kind of something?" I hesitated again, but then the words spilled out. "They had an affair." My mother's face went pale, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." "It is," I said, my voice cracking. "I've seen the proof." Harper admitted it. And so did Adrian. She didn't say anything for a long moment, her expression a mix of shock and heartbreak. Finally, she nodded, her voice trembling. "We need to talk to him." She pulled my father aside, and together, they confronted Adrian in the corner of the room. I watched from a distance as their voices rose, my father's face growing red with anger while my mother's eyes filled with tears. Adrian tried to defend himself, but his words seemed to do more harm than good. The rest of the family began to notice the commotion, whispers spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, the mood of the party had shifted entirely. As I stood there, watching my family unravel, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. This wasn't just about Harper and Adrian anymore. Their actions had thrown a grenade into the heart of our family, and we were all left to deal with the fallout. By the end of the night, the fractures were clear. My parents were furious with Adrian, barely speaking to him as they left. Some relatives sided with me, offering words of support, while others seemed hesitant, unsure how to navigate the situation. When I got home, Harper was waiting for me again. "How was the party?" she asked, her voice tentative. "It was a disaster," I said bluntly. "Everyone knows now." Adrian tried to defend himself, but no one's buying it. She winced, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I never wanted this to happen." I didn't respond. Her apologies didn't change anything. The damage was done, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I realized that this wasn't just about losing my wife or my brother. It was about losing the family I had always believed in. And that loss cut deeper than anything I had ever imagined. In the days that followed the family gathering, the fallout spiraled out of control. The news of Harper's affair with Adrian spread rapidly, whispered about in hushed conversations among relatives and even friends. I wasn't interested in airing my dirty laundry, but it seemed inevitable. People love a scandal, and this one was too explosive to stay hidden. The judgment came swiftly, and most of it was directed at Harper. She became a pariah in our social circles, her once respected reputation as a compassionate nonprofit director tarnished beyond recognition. At work, her colleagues began to distance themselves, and whispers of the affair even reached her professional network. The negativity didn't stop with her. Adrian, once the family's golden boy, faced the wrath of relatives who couldn't fathom his betrayal. My parents were the most vocal, expressing their disappointment in no uncertain terms. "How could you do this to your own brother?" my father had shouted during a tense phone call I overheard. "You've disgraced this family." Adrian tried to downplay the situation, insisting it was a mistake, but no one was buying it. His charm, which had always been his strongest weapon, failed him in the face of such an unforgivable act. Despite the consequences they were facing, Harper and Adrian didn't seem to fully grasp the gravity of their actions, or maybe they just didn't care. A week after the family gathering, I discovered that they were still in contact. I had logged into our shared phone account to check some billing details, something I'd done dozens of times before. That's when I noticed it, frequent calls and texts between Harper and Adrian. The timestamps aligned with times she claimed to be running errands or working late. My blood boiled as I stared at the screen. After everything that had happened, after the confrontation, the tears, the promises that it was over, they were still lying to me. When I confronted Harper about it, she didn't deny it. "We were just talking," she said defensively. "Trying to figure out how to handle the family's reaction." "Talking?" I said, my voice rising. "Do you think I'm stupid, Harper? After everything you've done, you're still sneaking around with him?" "It's not like that," she insisted. "It's over, I swear. But we needed to clear the air." "Clear the air?" I shouted. "You've destroyed our marriage, ripped this family apart, and you think you can clear the air with a few phone calls? Do you even hear yourself?" She didn't respond, tears streaming down her face. But I wasn't in the mood to console her. That night, I sent a group text to a few close family members, including my parents, explaining that Harper and Adrian were still in contact. The backlash was immediate. My parents called me, furious and heartbroken. "I don't know what we did wrong," my mother said, sobbing. "How could Adrian turn out like this?" "I don't have answers, Mom," I said, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "But I can't deal with this alone anymore." Adrian's reputation, already in tatters, took another hit as word spread that he hadn't let things go. Family members who had been on the fence about the situation turned against him completely. He became persona non grata at family events, uninvited from birthdays and dinners he would have been central to just months ago. Harper, too, faced even harsher consequences. Her colleagues started to question her character, and she was quietly removed from leadership roles in her nonprofit. Her social circle, once filled with admiration for her work, dwindled to almost nothing. As the negativity engulfed them, I felt a grim satisfaction, though it was short-lived. Their downfall didn't undo the damage they had caused me. If anything, it made the betrayal feel even heavier, like an anchor dragging me down with them. By now, my marriage was nothing but a hollow shell, and the family I had cherished was fractured beyond repair. The revelation that Harper and Adrian had continued to communicate was the final blow. Any small flicker of hope I'd held onto, that we might somehow salvage the marriage or the family bond, was extinguished. I filed for divorce the next day. My attorney, Denise, a sharp and no-nonsense woman, assured me that I had a strong case. "The evidence is clear," she said, flipping through the documentation I'd provided. "The affair, the financial records, the family testimony, it all works in your favor." But I wasn't prepared for what Harper would do next. When she was served with the divorce papers, I expected tears, anger, maybe even apologies. Instead, she retaliated. Harper, determined to maintain control over the situation, hired an aggressive lawyer who immediately began tearing into me. They contested everything, the house, the assets, even Tucker, our dog. Harper painted me as controlling and emotionally distant, spinning a narrative that she had been pushed into the affair by my shortcomings as a husband. "She's trying to shift the blame," Denise warned me. "It's a common tactic, but we'll fight it." Still, the accusation stung. Harper claimed that I had neglected her needs, that I was obsessed with work, that I had created an environment where she felt unseen and unloved. It was as though she was rewriting our entire marriage, turning me into the villain in her story. To make matters worse, she dragged Adrian into the proceedings. Her lawyer argued that Adrian had contributed to the breakdown of familial relationships, but claimed that I had overreacted, causing unnecessary drama that escalated the situation. The divorce quickly devolved into a bitter battle. Harper demanded half of everything, our savings, the house, even a portion of my retirement account. Her justification? She had sacrificed years of her life to support my career, despite her own thriving nonprofit work. I fought back, but the stress of it all was overwhelming. Every court hearing felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain of her betrayal and Adrian's involvement. The family, too, was caught in the crossfire. Relatives were forced to take sides, and the once close bond between us dissolved into resentment and silence. Harper, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on the chaos. She leveraged her nonprofit connections to rally a small group of supporters, spinning the narrative in her favor. She portrayed herself as a victim of an unsupportive husband and an overbearing family, deflecting the blame for her actions. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like I'd been through a war. Harper walked away with a significant portion of our shared assets, leaving me financially strained. She also managed to keep Tucker, a decision that hit me harder than I expected. "She's trying to hurt you in every way she can," Denise told me after the final ruling. And it worked. In the months that followed, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life, but the damage Harper had done lingered. The financial strain forced me to downsize, moving into a smaller house and cutting back on expenses. The emotional toll, however, was harder to shake. Harper, for all her victories in court, wasn't faring much better. The fallout from the affair and her aggressive tactics during the divorce had alienated nearly everyone in her life. The nonprofit she had worked so hard to build began losing donors and board members, many of whom quietly distanced themselves after learning about the scandal. Adrian, too, was left isolated. His attempts to smooth things over with the family were met with cold shoulders and curt responses. He and Harper were no longer seen together, though whether they had truly ended their relationship, I didn't care to know. As I sat alone in my new home one evening, the silence was deafening. The life I had built, the marriage, the family, the stability, was gone. And while Harper and Adrian had brought this on themselves, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The betrayal had destroyed everything, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. The divorce left me drained, financially and emotionally. The settlement had taken a chunk out of my savings, and Harper's actions during the process had left scars that felt impossible to heal. The house I had called home for years was no longer mine, and the dog that had been my companion through the worst days was now gone, too. But the fallout wasn't limited to me. The chaos Harper and Adrian had created rippled through the family like a shockwave, shattering bonds that once felt unbreakable. My parents, who had been devastated by Adrian's betrayal, tried to mediate some form of reconciliation between us. "He's still your brother, Leo," my mother said one evening, her voice pleading. "You don't have to forgive him, but we can't let this destroy the family." I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. "He destroyed the family, Mom. Not me." Adrian, for his part, had tried reaching out a few times. He sent texts apologizing, asking to meet, claiming he wanted to make things right. But I ignored him. There was nothing he could say that would erase what he had done. The extended family wasn't as forgiving. Word of the affair had spread, and Adrian found himself ostracized at gatherings. He was no longer invited to birthdays, holidays, or casual dinners. When he did show up uninvited, the atmosphere grew tense, with conversations turning stilted and uncomfortable until someone inevitably asked him to leave. Harper didn't fare much better. While she had managed to retain some professional stability, her personal life was in shambles. Friends who once admired her distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. She moved into a small apartment across town, far from the social circles we had once shared. I thought I might feel vindicated watching them face the consequences of their actions, but instead, I felt empty. Their downfall didn't erase the pain they had caused or the damage they had done to my life. I focused on picking up the pieces, throwing myself into work and trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. But even as I moved forward, the past lingered like a shadow. Every family event, every holiday, was a reminder of what I had lost, not just my marriage, but the trust and connection I had once felt with the people closest to me. One evening, my father called. His voice was heavy with resignation. "Leo, we need to talk about Adrian," he said. "What about him?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "He's not doing well," my father admitted. "He's been drinking a lot, and he's having trouble holding down a job. I know he brought this on himself, but he's still your brother." The guilt in my father's voice was palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to feel the same. "He made his choices," I said flatly. "He can live with the consequences." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to find a way to move past the anger and resentment. But the wounds were still too fresh, and the thought of forgiving Adrian felt impossible. As I sat alone that night, I realized that the betrayal hadn't just taken away my marriage, it had taken away my sense of family, too. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever get it back. Just when I thought the storm had finally passed, Harper struck back in a way that left me reeling. It wasn't about love or reconciliation, it was about power, control, and inflicting as much damage as she could. One afternoon, I received a call from Denise, my attorney. Her tone was grave. "Leo, we've got a problem," she said. "Harper's filed a motion to revisit the financial settlement." "What?" "We just finalized everything," I said, my voice rising in frustration. "She's claiming there were undisclosed assets," Denise explained. "Specifically, she's alleging that you've been hiding money in offshore accounts." It was absurd. I'd built my career on integrity, advising clients on how to manage their finances responsibly. The idea that I would hide assets was not only false but an attack on my reputation, both personally and professionally. "She's lying," I said firmly. "She knows it, and so do you." "Of course," Denise replied. "But proving that in court will take time, and money." The legal battle dragged on for weeks, draining what little energy I had left. Harper and her attorney were relentless, painting me as deceitful and manipulative, a stark contrast to the person I knew I was. At the same time, Harper began reaching out to mutual friends and even some of my colleagues, spinning a new narrative. She told them I was controlling, emotionally distant, and that my obsession with work had driven her into Adrian's arms. The damage was immediate. Friends who had once been supportive started pulling away, clearly unsure of who to believe. At work, whispers of the allegations reached my clients, forcing me to defend myself against baseless rumors. I felt trapped, as though Harper had taken everything I valued, my marriage, my family, my reputation, and systematically dismantled it. But her revenge didn't stop there. One day, while checking my email, I noticed a message from a journalist. The subject line read, "Request for comment on recent allegations." My heart sank as I read the email. Harper had leaked details of our divorce and the accusations about hidden assets to a local news outlet. While the story was vague, it painted me in a negative light, suggesting I was under investigation for financial misconduct. I called Denise immediately. "She's crossing a line," I said, barely able to contain my anger. This has gone too far. Denise sighed. I know, Leo. But fighting this in court will only add fuel to the fire. We need to focus on disproving her claims and clearing your name. I spent the next several weeks buried in paperwork, providing every piece of documentation I could to prove my innocence. Eventually, the court dismissed her motion, ruling that her allegations were baseless. But the damage was already done. The legal fees had left me financially strained, and the stress had taken a toll on my health. Friends and colleagues who had distanced themselves didn't come back, and I was left wondering if my reputation would ever fully recover. As for Harper, her professional life continued to crumble. The scandal surrounding our divorce and the affair had alienated her from key donors and colleagues, leaving her nonprofit struggling to stay afloat. But unlike me, she didn't seem interested in rebuilding. Instead, she doubled down on her narrative, painting herself as a victim and refusing to acknowledge the role she had played in the destruction of our lives. I thought I would feel some sense of victory when the court ruled in my favor, but all I felt was exhaustion. Harper's revenge may not have succeeded in taking everything from me, but it had left deep scars, ones that I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. And despite everything, the betrayal still lingered, a constant reminder of how much I had lost. After the court dismissed Harper's baseless claims, I finally had a moment to breathe. The legal battles were over, and for the first time in months, I wasn't fighting to defend my reputation or protect what little I had left. But the damage had already been done. I moved into a modest apartment in the city, leaving behind the house that Harper had fought so hard to keep. It wasn't home, but it was mine, free from the ghosts of our marriage and the memories of everything we had lost. Work became my lifeline. I poured myself into my job, taking on extra clients and projects to rebuild my finances and distract myself from the emptiness. But even that wasn't the same. Some clients had left during the height of the rumors, and while most of my colleagues knew the truth, the whispers still lingered in the background. Socially, I kept to myself. The family was fractured beyond repair, with Adrian still alienated and Harper barely mentioned during conversations. My parents tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the tension was impossible to ignore. "Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend?" my mother asked one evening. "I don't know, Mom," I replied hesitantly. "It's just us," she said quickly. "No Adrian, no drama. I promise." I agreed, but the dinner was as strained as I'd expected. My father avoided talking about Adrian entirely, while my mother tried to fill the silence with small talk. It was clear they were struggling to reconcile their love for both of us with the rift that had torn us apart. Harper, meanwhile, had disappeared from my life entirely. I heard from mutual friends that she was still working at her nonprofit, but barely. Donations had plummeted, and she had stepped back from her leadership role, likely to avoid further scrutiny. One afternoon, I ran into Kara, a former friend of Harper's who had always been honest with me. "She's not doing well," Kara said, her tone sympathetic. "I saw her the other day, and she looked lost. I don't think she's been able to move on." I nodded, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but another part couldn't forget everything she had done, the lies, the affair, the revenge that nearly destroyed me. As the months went on, I started to piece my life back together, slowly and cautiously. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym regularly, and even picked up a new hobby, photography. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to focus on something other than the wreckage of my past. Despite my efforts, the scars remained. Trust felt like a foreign concept, something I wasn't sure I could ever give to anyone again. Every time I met someone new, I found myself questioning their intentions, wondering if they, too, were capable of betrayal. One night, as I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out over the city lights, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I had been before all this happened. The betrayal had changed me, hardening parts of me that used to be open and trusting. I had survived, yes. But surviving wasn't the same as living. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly live again. As time went on, the wounds from Harper's betrayal and Adrian's actions didn't heal as much as they scarred over. Life moved forward, but it felt like I was dragging a weight behind me, one I couldn't shake no matter how far I went. I threw myself into routines, determined to rebuild a semblance of normalcy. The gym, my photography, and work kept me occupied, but they were only distractions. Beneath the surface, the emptiness lingered. Harper's life, from what little I heard, wasn't much better. Her professional reputation had taken too many hits to recover fully, and she left her nonprofit entirely, retreating into a quiet, isolated existence. Mutual friends described her as withdrawn and bitter, clinging to a narrative of victimhood that even her remaining supporters struggled to believe. Adrian, too, continued to spiral. The drinking worsened, and he moved from job to job, unable to find stability. The family had tried to intervene a few times, but their efforts were met with resistance and denial. My parents, once so proud of their sons, now seemed resigned to the fractured state of our family. I wish I could say that I found peace, that I reached a point where the past stopped haunting me. But the truth is, the betrayal left a permanent mark. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the man who had been betrayed not just by his wife but by his own brother. One evening, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through old photos, I came across a picture from years ago. It was from a family barbecue, Harper and Adrian laughing together while I flipped burgers in the background, oblivious to the storm that would come years later. I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. There had been happiness once, real happiness. And now, all that remained was regret. Regret for the time I had wasted, the trust one had given so freely, and the family I had fought so hard to keep intact. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't undo the past. All I could do was carry it with me, a constant reminder of the cost of betrayal. Harper's revenge had left her financially stable but emotionally hollow. Her choices had alienated her from everyone who once cared about her, leaving her alone with the consequences of her actions. Adrian, too, was isolated, a shadow of the man he used to be. And me? I wasn't broken, but I wasn't whole either. The story didn't end with redemption or forgiveness. There were no happy endings, no silver linings. Just three people forever changed by the choices they made and the bonds they shattered. As I set the photo aside and turned off the lights, I realized that maybe some wounds never truly heal. And maybe that's okay. Sometimes, survival is the best we can hope for.